Well, I want to welcome everybody here in the auditorium. Welcome to Crossroads, everybody in the atrium, and those of you that are watching online also. And this week I was out and about, and somebody said to me, "Man, you got a big week coming up at Crossroads. Big week for everybody over there." And I think it was referring to Holy Week and our Holy Week service on Wednesday and then the 5 services on Easter. And I said, "Oh yeah, this is the biggest week in all of Christianity. This is the most important week in the Christian faith." Then I said, "But let's keep it in perspective. It's really the most important week in the life of the person that was a central personality in all of history, Jesus Christ." And this week, starting on Monday, I'm going to walk us through day by day, sometimes hour by hour, through the final week of Jesus' life. And you might be asking, how are you going to do that? Well, I'm making a 5-short video series. Every day, there'll be a brief message this week about what Jesus did on that day, that week of the final week of his life. And we're going to post these on the Crossroads Facebook page, also on our church website. So if you're not a friend of Crossroads on Facebook, become a friend. You can get these videos. There's also a card in the program here, Holy Week video series. That's what that's all about. And you can find those videos, very brief message. But I'm going to talk about what happened to Jesus. What did he do on Monday through Friday of Holy Week? And if you like these videos, share them with people. Share them with family, friends, and coworkers. But I think at the end of this little walk this week, I think you're going to see some things that you maybe didn't know Jesus did on that day of the final week of his life that led to the cross and the miracle of the resurrection. Well, today I'm wrapping up the Jesus Way series, and today I want to look at a miracle that Jesus did. When he healed a man that was blind, born blind his whole life. And the story of this blind man is found in John chapter 9, the whole chapter. I hope you'll read it sometime this week. But all his life he couldn't see. He suffered all his life in physical darkness. Jesus comes into his life, and Jesus heals not only his physical darkness, but his spiritual darkness. Jesus helps him to have faith. And maybe you heard the dramatic operation that a woman by the name of Sally Collins went through. Sally Collins, from 1982, was legally blind due to a rare eye disease. She couldn't see. She never saw 2 of her 3 children. Then on March 20th, 2010, or 10 years ago, I should say, her oldest son, Christopher, 15, was hit by a car and killed. And of the people that received transplants from his organs, one was his own mother. She received corneas, and she regained her sight. What a gift, but what a price. Sally Collins was blind 13 years of her life. This guy that Jesus heals was blind from birth. And put yourself in the place of this blind man, born blind. All his life, he's unable to see. That means he probably was a beggar, because that's what happened to people with special needs back in the 1st century. And I could imagine every day of his life, at least once he must have thought, what would it be like to see? What a difference it would make in my life if I could see. I know I can't. But how would my life change if I could see? And Jesus comes into his life, and Jesus helps him to see. Let me ask this question. What would you like to see? What would you like to see in your own life, in a spiritual sense, but also in a personal sense? What would you like to have God be able to help you see? Maybe you would say, I'd like to be able to see my marriage get better. I can't see it happening, but that's what I'd like to see. Or I'd like to see my finances get in order. Or I'd like to see me as being a person with a strong faith. I see other people like that. I just don't see that for me. I'd like to be able to see that. I'd like to see my life having meaning and purpose. I'd like to see me being a person that was optimistic, a positive attitude, joyful person. That's what I'd like to see. I'd like to see me reconciling a relationship in my life with my parents or with my kids. What would you like God to be able to help you see today? Think about that. And to help you really make it personal, I put that line at the top of the message notes, if you pull those out. There's a line right up there. I would love to be able to see. Fill in what that is you'd like God to help you be able to see right now at this point in your life. This will make it personal and make this message most beneficial if you write something down. Okay? And there's four things that happened to this man that helped him have faith. And these four things God can also strengthen your faith. And God can help you to see that thing that you wrote down on that paper. Here's the first thing that he had to do, the blind man in John 9. He had to break through either or thinking. Either or thinking. It's number one. You can write that down. In John 9:2, Jesus' disciples, they revealed this kind of thinking. When they walked by this man born blind, they asked Jesus a very odd question. Look at this. Rabbi's disciples asked him, why was this man born blind? Was it because of his own sins or his parents' sins? There's blindness, Jesus. Somebody must have sinned. I mean, they actually believed that in that day. They believed a fetus was capable of sinning. They believed that if a pregnant woman went and worshiped at a pagan temple, her fetus was guilty of the sin of idolatry. That's the kind of world that these disciples had grown up in. And they're trapped in this kind of thinking that they go, who sinned? Somebody sinned. Either this man sinned or his parents sinned. That's the only options they grew up with. They were wrong, but that's the kind of world that they grew up in back then. And their thinking trapped them into seeing the man's situation as hopeless. Nothing could be done about it. That's what either or thinking does to us. It traps us. A lot of you are aware of either or thinking in business. Either or thinking in business. It's dangerous to say it's either this or it's this and not see any other option that could open things up. I know businesses that have failed because of that kind of thinking. Failed because of either or thinking. In fact, I heard of a small business, and not see any other options. I heard of a small business, man. He had a store, had a nice store going. All of a sudden, brand new box store. Opens next door to him, selling the same stuff. They put a big sign over the big box store, says best deals in town. Then he's horrified. Another big box store opens on the other side of him, selling his stuff. They hold up a big sign, lowest prices in town. He panicked till he thought of another option, another idea. He put the biggest sign of all over his store. It said main entrance. Either or thinking. It's bad for business. It's even worse in your life. Either or thinking. Either or thinking. Either I got to take this job or I'm going to have to file bankruptcy. We'll end up living under a bridge somewhere. Either I'm going to be lonely the rest of my life or I better marry this person I know is not right for me, but hey, the clock's ticking. Either I got to go through this divorce or I'm going to be miserable every day the rest of my life in this marriage. Either I'm going to feel this guilt over things I've done in the past all my life, or I got to become a monk. I got to become some religious fanatic, never have any fun anymore. That kind of thinking. That kind of thinking traps us. And if you're a victim of either or thinking, that's how you feel. You feel trapped. Trapped in a bad marriage. Trapped in a bad job. Trapped with bad parents, trapped with bad kids, trapped in a bad life. Look at what Jesus had to say about either or thinking in this story of the blind man, John chapter 9. Verse 3, Jesus said to the disciples, you're asking the wrong question. You're looking for someone to blame. There's no such cause effect here. Look instead for what God can do. That's how you break through either or thinking. You look for a third option. You look for what God can do in that situation. And remember what Matthew 19:26 says. It says, with God, all things are possible. With God, everything's possible. God can change everything. God can change those circumstances you're in. But more often, what God really does, God changes us. God changes our heart. God changes our attitude. If you're in a either or trap, begin now to look for another option that is so radically different, it could only come from God. That's the first thing. When we're struggling with something, we can learn from this guy. He had to break through either or thinking. Here's the second thing. Number 2, write this down. You got to take a step of faith. That's what he did. He took a step of faith. He asked God to heal him. He asked Jesus to heal him. That's what he was struggling with, blindness. You ask God to help you with what you're struggling with. And look at it. He asked Jesus to heal him. Look at John 9, verse 7. Jesus told him, go wash yourself in the pool of Siloam. Siloam meant sent. The water was sent through a conduit, through the city into this pool. Go wash yourself in the pool of Siloam. So the man went and washed and came back seeing. And I can imagine what he thought. Go wash? Go wash my eyes? Great. I've washed my eyes 1,000 times. I've even done it 1,000 times, probably in that pool he washed his eyes. Yet Jesus sends him down there to that pool to wash his eyes. And you know what he does? He does it. He does it, and a miracle happens. And he sees. And that's when miracles happen. That's when they happen right there. You know, Jesus said to him, I want you to do something very ordinary. Very ordinary. I want you to walk through the streets you walked before. I want you to go to the pool you've been in 1,000 times. Wash your eyes like you've done over and over. You do it, and you're going to see. That's when miraculous things happen. They always happen when somebody does something very ordinary in obedience to God. God says, do this. And they actually do it. They actually do it. And something miraculous happens. God wanted to split the Red Sea. God said to Moses, this is in Exodus 14. He says to Moses, that stick in your hand, hold it up. Moses goes, what? Hold up this stick. But Moses does it. And the Red Sea splits in two. God wanted to feed 5,000 people. It's in Matthew 14. What does God do? Go gets a lunch from a kid, bread and fish. Does that. And Jesus multiplies it. Something very ordinary becomes something very miraculous. God wanted the walls of Jericho to fall down. What does he do? Joshua 6. He says to the people, walk around the walls, blow a trumpet. And they actually do it. And the walls fall down. I mean, what knocked the walls down? The trumpet? No. God did it. But that ordinary step of faith allowed God to work an incredible miracle. So let me ask this about maybe what you're struggling with. You willing to do something very ordinary in obedience to God that says, you know what? I'm going to trust you on this, God. I'm going to do what you say about this situation. I'm not going to trust me. I'm going to trust God. An ordinary step of faith for you. I don't know. What's an ordinary step of faith for you? Could be to make a phone call to someone. You know in your heart, I need to fix this relationship with them. Ordinary step of faith. Make a phone call. Send them an email. Set up a time to get together. Maybe an ordinary step of faith for you would be to start praying about something you used to pray about, but when that prayer didn't get answered when you wanted to, you just quit praying. Could be to start praying again. Maybe it's going to be to make an appointment to see a doctor, or to see a therapist, or to step out and go to Celebrate Recovery on Friday night. Get yourself in recovery. Might be to go get one more application. Fill the application out, turn it back in. Ordinary step of faith. Might be to give, and you haven't been giving. Here, ordinary step of faith in obedience to God. And you never know the miracles God does through that. I mean, look at our Daring Faith initiative we did a year ago. Many people made commitments to give to Daring Faith. They had no idea what was going to happen. We had dreams of it. We could never imagine some of the things that have happened. I mean, just one last week, the food packing event. People started giving to Daring Faith. We never thought a year ago we would have packed 140,000 packs of food and send them to people in need. Yeah. I mean, that all happened because people stepped out and started giving to something, even when they didn't know exactly what was going to happen. I'll tell you, when you take this kind of step of faith, no matter what it is, I'll tell you what the first thought you're going to have. First thought, many of us have, just what this guy had. Oh, this ain't going to work. This ain't going to make a difference. This isn't going to make a dent in his situation. It's not going to work. I'm sure that's what this guy thought. But what did he do? He went down to the pool, washed his eyes. He went, maybe he just said, I don't have anything better to do today. I'll do it. And he does it. And a miracle happens. You make the phone call. You write the email. You get the application and fill it out. You start praying. You start giving. You show up here every week. You invite people to Easter. Even when you go, they're going to say no. Don't answer for people. God says, do these things. We do it and miracles happen. They do. But that's our first thought often. It's not going to work. But when you take that step of faith, it gives God a chance to work. And it's incredible what God does. And so this guy, he begins to see. He begins to see. What does he do? He goes back, if you read John chapter 9, he goes back to the people he had spent his whole life around, his whole life. And it leads him to number three. Number three, he has to look past what others cannot see. That's number three. He has to look past what they see. He gets healed. He goes back to these people that had watched him all his life beg, and he's never seen their faces. He sees their faces for the first time. And you know what they all have written on their face? Doubt. They don't believe it. They point at him. John 9, verse 8. His neighbors and others who knew him as a blind beggar, they ask each other, isn't this the man who used to sit and beg? Some claimed he was. Look at verse 9. Others said, no, he only looks like him. But he insisted, I am the man. In other words, they go, this can't be the guy. This can't be the guy. There's never been a person born blind and now they see. He looks like him. That can't be him. Can't be him. And instead of everybody being excited that this guy can see now and had a miracle, they're throwing a wet blanket over the whole thing. They're not being excited, enthusiastic about it, about the good that happened to him. You have people in your life like that, right? Something good happens to you. They're not all excited for you. They start telling you what's wrong with it. You win a trip to Tahiti. They start going, oh man, you're gonna have jet lag. Man, they got big mosquitoes down there. These are people they would have told the Wright brothers. If God meant you to fly, to give you wings. You got people like that in your life. There's always people around us. Tell you, you should doubt. You should doubt. Always people like that. They'll say, you might as well stay in the dark. It's impossible to see the light. Impossible. Reconcile your marriage? Impossible. Impossible. Sobriety? Don't get your hopes up. Faith in God, it's not going to happen for you. A God who created the world, and loves you and cares for you, wants a personal relationship with you. That's a fairy tale, they'll tell you. Freedom from guilt, forgiveness over what's happened in the past, second chance. Negative people, they'll tell you this. That can't happen for you. We need people that fan the flames of faith in our life. We need people that encourage us. That's why it's so important to be here every weekend. Because you get around people here at least once a week that encourage your faith, that fan the flames of faith. And that's why I'll always encourage people. Get in a small group, get on a serving team. You weekly get around people that will encourage you in your faith. Well, these leaders chime in John 9:18. These are the Jewish leaders. They still did not believe he'd been blind. They don't believe he's blind. They don't believe this whole thing happened. They're trying to write the whole thing off. And in order to look past what others can't see, you and I have to have a different kind of faith to do this. We got to have a different kind of faith. We got to have the kind of faith this guy had. And I love his response to all of these doubters. Look at John 9:25. He goes, one thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see. That's the classic answer right there. You can argue all you want. You can argue all you want about this thing. But here I am. I was blind, but now I see. You can't change that fact, no matter how tightly you want to close your eyes. Man, it's light outside and I can see it. I was blind. Now I see. Now I see. Reminds me of another man. Was blind, but then he was able to see. Many of you know the story of John Newton. He was born in the early 1700s, grew up in a Christian family. But then his mother taught him faith, but then she died when he was 7. Then his father died when he was 11. And then he wandered the streets of London, got kicked around in the streets of London. And then he lied about his age, joined the Royal Navy. And in the Royal Navy, he learned to navigate ships. But he deserted the Navy in Africa, joined a harem. A harem. John Newton joins this harem. And the people in the harem, they mistreated young John. They mistreated him. They actually would put him in a cage often. They put him in a cage and they'd throw food at him in there. On the ground, throw rotten food off him. They would sometimes tie him to a bed and they would beat him. But one day he escaped. He escaped from the harem and he escaped to the coast of Africa and he built a fire on the coast and a trade ship going by saw it. They sent a boat and they picked him up. And with that, John Newton became part of the slave trade of the 18th century. And he fit right in because by this time of his life, he was a hard, cold, calloused man. And he fit right into that horrendous system that picked up tens of thousands of men, women, and children and fed them to the sharks as the ships crossed the Atlantic Ocean to deliver millions to a living death of slavery in our country. And one day, John, and when everyone on the ship was stone drunk, John too, he fell overboard into the water, thought he was going to die. And the skipper of the ship took a harpoon and threw it at him to try to save him. And it stuck in him. And they dragged him back out of the water onto the boat. They put him in the hold to die. And John said that's when he came to himself. That's when he came to himself. And he said it was there that God got hold of his life. And he said he rolled over, got on his knees, and he prayed. And he asked God to forgive his sins and his wretchedness. And he asked God to change his life. And God did change his life. And he lived. In the last 43 years of John Newton's life, he was a leader of one of the most influential churches in the center of London. And he played a key role in abolishing slavery in England. But John became best known for the poems he wrote that were later put to music. And you know his most famous poem. His most famous poem goes like this. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. I was blind, but now I see. And the words of Amazing Grace, written by John Newton, they echo in our minds because they're so real. They're so real. The song rings true because it comes out of a man's life. I once was blind, but now I see. When you share your faith with someone, those of you who have faith in Jesus, that's the way you do it, right there. You just look at somebody and you just say, I don't know about anybody else. I know a lot of people have doubts about faith and all that, but I once was, but now I'm. For me, in my own life, I was once cynical about faith. I once had so many doubts about faith, I would argue with people about faith. That's the kind of doubts I had. I once felt like there was no meaning, purpose in life. I had so many doubts in life. I remember when I was 18, I was hitchhiking to California. I got picked up by a woman in New Mexico. She was full of faith, talking about it all the time. I'm cynical, doubts, arguing with her. Then her car slipped off the ice in New Mexico, went off the road, down an embankment, 100 yards, blew out all 4 tires, never rolled over. Once we got out of the car, she said, I knew we'd be safe. My church in California is praying for me on this trip. And I was so cynical, I said, if you slowed down, nobody'd have to pray for you. But I stayed with her. She said she'd drop me where I wanted to go in Southern California if I went to her church. And I went to her church with her. And I didn't give my life to Jesus then. But that was the first time I heard of faith in Jesus Christ, in the message of Jesus Christ. I once was without purpose in my life before I came to know Christ. I remember exactly where I was standing, though, when I did give my life to Christ. I was 27 years old in a little church in Windsor, and I prayed that simple prayer. And God put a sense of purpose, hope, and security in me, just like that. It was like I locked in on it at that moment. And I felt like there was meaning and purpose in this life. And that hole in my heart was filled that day with Jesus. I once was blind, but now I see. What's it for you? What's it for you? I once was bitter. Now I'm joyful. I once was without hope. Now I have hope. I once was hateful. Now I'm filled with love. What's it for you? Or maybe you haven't come to faith in Jesus like in that way. Well, then number 4 here that we can learn from this guy is for you. Number 4, trust Jesus with your life. It's number 4. This man that Jesus healed in John 9, ultimately, Jesus wasn't most interested in healing his physical blindness. Jesus was interested in healing his spiritual blindness. He wanted to show him how to have faith. And I know a few people where all of a sudden the light goes on. There's few people like that. Maybe that's you. Maybe that'll be you. But it's like more people I know are like this guy. It's like a dimmer switch slowly gets turned up. And he sees more and more and more. And then one day he realizes, that's what I've been looking for all along. Now I see. Now I see it. Now I understand it. It's happening for some of you right now. It's interesting how the light slowly dawned for this man in John chapter 9. First, he says this about Jesus. John chapter 9, verse 11. He replied, the man they called Jesus made some mud and put it in my eyes. He told me to go to Siloam and wash, so I went and washed. Then I could see. Notice he says, Jesus was a man. Some of you see Jesus that way. He's just a man. He lived in history. It's all he could see at the beginning. Maybe that's all you see. Then he spent more time looking at who Jesus was, how he acted, and what he did, and he realized John 9:17. Look at this. Finally, they, the Pharisees, turned again to the blind man. What have you to say about him? Was your eyes he opened? The man replied, he's a prophet. Jesus is a prophet, he says now. A lot of people think that. They go, Jesus was a great teacher. He was a prophet sent by God. But it didn't end there. The light really turned on when at the end of the chapter, he comes face to face with Jesus. John 9:38. Then the man said, Lord, I believe. And he worshiped him. And that's what Jesus was working to do. He finally saw Jesus as Lord of this life. He sees him as the God who made everything. He's the one that cares about me and wants to have a relationship with me. And Jesus helped that blind man before he believed in him. He helped him before he believed in him. And he's helped you before you believed in him. He helped me before I believed in him and trusted him. And this is a time right now for you to say, I'm not going to just see Jesus as a man or just as a prophet or a genie who, when I have struggles, I bring them to him. Today's the day I want to see him as the Lord of my life. The one I want to follow with my whole life. The one I want to ask to lead and guide my whole life from this day forward. And I want to give you an opportunity to tell him that right now. So let's bow our heads together. And pray with me if that's you. Just pray something like this. And actually the words aren't important. It's really an attitude of your heart. That's what's important. Just say something like this. Jesus, I see today more clearly than I've ever seen before my need for you and my need to trust you. I need your forgiveness. I need your guidance in my life. And I want that relationship with you. And I ask you to save me, Jesus, today. I ask you to rescue me. Rescue me from the things that I struggle with, and rescue me from the sins that bring me down, and the sense of hopelessness and anxiety I have about the future. I ask you to save and rescue me. And I ask you to restore me to that relationship with you that I was created for, that brings joy to my life and direction to my life. And I ask you today to be Lord of my life. And I pray this, Jesus, in your name. Amen.